Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Kennedy and this evening I'm hosting the SiteBulb live Q&A on structured data problem solving. Tonight on the live stream we've got two of the most well-known structured data experts in SEO. We've got Aleyda Solis and Dave Ojeda. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having me, although I wouldn't call myself a structured data expert at all, but I'm more than happy to be here sharing my let's say, journey and misfortunes with structured data as an SEO, for sure.
Yeah. Definitely in the world of SEO, I'd say you're on the expert side of it. And from SiteBulb team, I've also got Patrick Hathaway here, who many of you will know.
Hello.
And on the live chat, we've got Simon Cox helping us out. So hello, Simon. This is the third in our series of structured data Q&A sessions. The past two, if you've not seen them, we did a one on making the business case for structured data and implementation in the real world. Tonight, we're going to be looking at structured data problem solving, trying to tie up some of the issues from them last two that we've done. Before I dive into the questions, I'm going to ask Aleyda and Dave to give us a bit of an introduction. So, for anyone that doesn't know already, who are you, what do you do, and what is structured data to you? Aleyda, would you like to go first?
Yes, I am an SEO consultant. I have an SEO consultancy called Ojeda, and I mainly tend to work with whether SaaS, big brands, marketplaces, to e-commerce type of websites too, and structured data. In my case, it has become, I will say, much more prominent in the last few years, even if we know it shouldn't be the driver of it, but it has. Google search features support that are triggered by structured data, right? And of course, we can talk about this later on in the Q&A, but realistically, yes, this has been like the main driver in my case. And the role that it plays for me is how it can connect and align with the SEO process and efforts of my clients, the strategy that has been set in order to maximize the visibility and ultimately the ROI and type of business related goals that we're looking to achieve.
Yeah, a lot to cover there. And Dave, how about yourself?
Dave Ojeda. I've been an SEO consultant for over a decade. My specialty now is doing structured data, whether it's for companies or white labeling for agencies. For me, structured data, I mean, I've been doing it a while, and it's great to see that it's coming to the forefront like this time we're having here to chat about it. I think that for me, it's two sides of the coin. It's the rich result potential that you have for your site and your site pages, but also that overall encompassing like umbrella of understanding to build a quasi knowledge graph on your site, relate the entities to each other, relate the entities to other pages and the internet as a whole. And I think that's some really exciting times for us to be able to have the tools to provide that information to build these knowledge graphs.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that most of us are just scratching the surface with a lot of this stuff. Once you get into knowledge graphs and things like you mentioned, it's a whole different world.
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah. And Patrick, I'm sure most people know you now, but give yourself a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Hathaway. So I'm the co-founder of SiteBulb. Yeah, you probably know me from spamming emails and stuff like that. And part of my role at SiteBulb is to help with the product development. And in the last few months, structured data validation across websites has become a big part of that. So that is one of the reasons why structured data has become, a big part of my job.
Yeah. Right. So we've got quite a few questions to work through. I'm also going to do a bit of a shout out. If anyone's got any questions in the live chat, please let us know. If you can mark them with a Q at the start, that'll help us pull them out, and we'll try and drop them in as we go through and cover as many as we can. So to get started, quite a practical hands-on one. This is about apps. So, is there a danger of schema duplication from different apps? They give the example of Yoast and WooCommerce, but I'd assume this counts for any apps, whether that be WordPress or whatever platform you're on.
Oh, yes.
Aleyda, you're nodding a lot there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, this I have to say that I reckon that doesn't happen that much for my own clients, because they are more like enterprise level type of companies, and thankfully whether their CMSs already have some sort of feature, or we use an enterprise level type of website. For example, I collaborated for in an SEO process where they were using WordLift to create a whole knowledge graph of the website. So it was a very consistent, all the entities connecting to each other in a way that set up the right context regarding the meaning of the different objects, relationships, etc. On the other hand, however, I do have my own projects, and these are the type of things that I think that it is mostly like smaller type of businesses might even struggle with, that rely on WordPress, for example. That is a really good example, because yes, a lot of businesses use Yoast, but there are still a little bit of sometimes even restrictions of what they cannot do, or they are not only using Yoast, but additional plugins that will add on additional structured data, and some people will, well, there is room to specify even more, right? So you end up like duplicating sometimes the exact same different, or assign different type of types for the same content, things like that, or duplicate the exact same property, things like that, right? So I think it is important to have consistency, to try to use a tool that will allow you to scale. So for example, in my case with Remoters, right, we rely on WordPress. I use Yoast, but when we started implementing structured data for our job board, for the jobs structured data, it didn't support it. So we did our own native sort of implementation. We ended up like, messing things around a little bit. And now we are like, okay, let's clean things up and rely only on this consistent tool to have a consistent implementation, right? A good implementation without issues. At the end of the day, this is the thing, right? Even if it doesn't trigger any issues, or might not trigger any issues or errors or warnings, and the structured data validator from Google or in the Google Search Console, at the end of the day, is like, is this really an accurate representation of my content, or of all the objects of my website, or my entities, right? So, and what we want to achieve there is to clarify as much, to be able to give effective and consistent information to Google, rather than mixed signals at the end of the day.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that, the thing is, for like small to medium-sized businesses, schema duplication, it happens, and it happens without them knowing, because they're just not aware of what's happening on their site. So you could get a schema being created by, a plugin, by a theme. You could have it being implemented by GTM that you didn't know about, programmatic solution. So the thing is to understand, where is it coming from? And then from that point, understand, like, number one, should it all be there? I mean, in a perfect world, you'd like to have one source of truth or one creation schema markup, which sometimes you can't, but you want to look at that potential. But also, as we know, schema markup can be like microdata, JSON LD. So then you have to look at another level of like, is it all coming in the right format? Now, Google can recognize mixed formats of microdata and JSON LD, but in the end, I think it goes back to that being consistent and knowing where it's coming from, and having a consistent approach moving forward, regardless of the size of the site, is the best approach to take.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I hear you with the GTM, not knowing where is this coming, and searching through all of the features of your CMSs and plugins and themes and extensions, and then realizing, the GTM implementation with that static, outdated structured data from years ago. Yeah.
Next question I've got is quite a wide one. I don't think we can answer it in its entirety, but which structured data type should I use for which page? I know it seems a simple question, but I see the wrong type being used on the wrong page every time. So without the context of what page we're talking about here, you can't really answer that. But have you got a process that you go through, or any way of defining what should or shouldn't go on a particular page?
I'll take it. So the biggest thing for me is, going and looking at the page and understanding, like, what is the main entity? What is the main concept that is trying to be brought across when people are looking at that? And then from there, looking at, like, what are the other entities that exist on that page and how they're related to the main topic, as well as the other pages, and, like I said before, internet as a whole. So now certain pages are easy: a product page, a home page, which is an organization, a local business. Those are easy. Some of them are more nuanced. For instance, like if you had an industry page for your SaaS product, that doesn't really fall into a perfect hole for schema.org to represent, but you can use a catch-all in some of these cases where it's like, well, this is information we want to get out there. It's relevant. Let's use an article because this is just information. And by using that article to represent something like that, you're able to represent that entity, fully define it, and even use external definitions such as Wikipedia to represent that industry related to the SaaS product. And I think that's where you need to go. The other thing I'll say is that sometimes with structured data, you should mark up only the information that is on the page, but not necessarily mark up everything in structured data. You have a choice there. And there are some pages, for certain cases, where there just is not a need to put structured data on there. What is represented there is not important enough to build into this internal knowledge graph you're trying to build.
That is super important, because at the end of the day, it should be something meaningful for the context, for that particular context of the graph that you're building, right? It's definitely more straightforward in some scenarios than others. So, for example, if you're in a product page and you have an FAQ at the end of the product page, or a Q&A, right? Realistically, if you ask any SEO, any developer for that matter, person in charge of the implementation, and you ask, okay, if you want this page to be shown for something, or to be recognized for something, for what it should be, I think in 99% of the cases, the person will answer, oh, for a product. This is a product. The main value of this page should be a product. So this is something that you will definitely prioritize. In other cases, it's a little bit trickier. So, for example, especially with informational content, Q&As, how-tos, FAQs. Some FAQs can look a little bit of like how-tos, right? And some Q&As can look a little bit like FAQs too, or have a sort of hybrid sort of role sometimes, right? But at the end of the day, it's about verifying and validating and asking, if I want to be shown for something, or to be recognized this page for something, what is the most representative format or type for this particular page, and be consistent. What is important is also being consistent, instead of trying to mix, for example, if you have 10 type of pages of this same type, to be blending and switching from one type to another in every single one of them, right? Consistency is also important.
Yeah. I think that key thing to keep coming back to is, what is the main entity? What is the key focus of the page? That seems to keep coming up again and again. So, got one in the chat here. This is one we've actually covered in some of the other sessions, but it keeps coming up time and time again. We've already talked about apps. So, Maret says, what would be the best way to get Schema implemented from a tech SEO Google ability point of view? Now, this is usually asked from the easiest way or something, but there's slightly different spin on it.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned before there the likes of Google Tag Manager. It's really interesting to get different people's takes on the likes of that, especially.
Well, I think that I am very happy to see that there are more and more tools supporting better structured data. So even we mentioned before Yoast, right? Realistically, I have been surprised of how they have started to support so many more types of structured data lately, right? And then we have tools like Schema apps that are also supporting I think that most of the types that you will need, and they have a WordPress add-on too. So not only enterprise level websites are able to profit from it or to leverage it, then we have tools or add-ons like the ones of as WordLift. At the end of the day, I think that what will be important is to check, depending on your own capacities and flexibility and resources, is that what is the easier in your particular case? If you're using a platform or a CMS where there is not native feature, what is the plugin or add-on that you can use that it scales and supports and give you support for the structured data that you want to implement right now, and that you might think that might need in the future, and might want in the future too, to avoid having to switch or replace things like that. That is important. But yes, you might even want to leverage GTM, although it breaks my heart to see so much thing relying on GTM rendering and the impact that it might have also on so many other things. But yes, I will try as much as possible to implement it directly within the CMS or the platform directly itself. Yeah.
I would go with, understanding once again, what is the sophistication level of your team or the people that you're bringing in to implement schema markup? I mean, going back to, if it's an enterprise-like solution, then you are looking at enterprise products such as Schema App or WordLift, something like that you need to do. If the sophistication is lower, then maybe it's something, and maybe they're simpler, more straightforward sites. So maybe you're just using a Yoast plugin or something like that to get what you need, because that's everything you need. And and a lot of times sites are not going to be scaling. They're just they're a 50-page site, a 200-page site, and nothing is going to change in the next 2 or 3 years. So going with a simple plugin solution is good. Now with GTM, it all depends. It all depends on with the sophistication you have with that, but also I tend to look for other options other than GTM. GTM, I'm mostly confident in it, but not always, is what I could say about that.
You're confident in that it's being picked up?
I'm confident in like the consistency of it being able to work correctly and not breaking. And they've made improvements, tons of improvements, but I've also seen some quirkiness happen over time. It's one of those things where it's like anything, you want to keep looking at everything you're producing, everything you're deploying to make sure it's still working. With GTM, I'm more confident in other tools and other resources to implement schema markup versus GTM on a lot of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got another one here from Mark, kind of a follow-up to his question about which type on which page. So if you're not sure about which type you should be using, is it better to use the wrong type on the wrong page or not at all? And what is the impact of using the wrong type?
I think that, obviously we don't want to use a wrong type on a page, no matter what. And, if there are some questions on what that type is, maybe you look deeper into why is it we don't quickly understand what the major class is? There's a question there that goes just into the content of the site of what this page represents. That I think that over time, if you make that investigation, you may start to understand what that main entity is, or maybe decide that it isn't really one thing, it's several things. So what should we do with it? I think that going with the option of putting something that you're not sure of, I would rather hold off putting any schema markup until you have a definitive answer that makes sense for you and what's represented on your site.
100%. Also, because you can, not only that, you can end up even getting a manual action just because of that. It's something that you really want to avoid, because then all of the effort that you will do will go to the garbage anyway. So I think that it is important that you confirm, validate well that is actually the relevant type of structured data that is meaningful for that particular page.
Yeah. So jumping forward a bit, so post-implementation stuff. My schema markup is correct and valid, but how do I ensure that the actual data is correct? So we were talking about this the other day after we got the question, and how we've interpreted this is that it's the data type and everything in there is fine, but say your template is pulling in a title into the description field or something. Is there a way of telling when it's valid? As far as Google's concerned, it looks correct, but how do you make sure that you're not populating it with rubbish? Is there a way of doing that?
I think at the end, this sort of type of the validation that you do and you do in your SEO process with your own content, right? When you verify that your metadata is correct, that your titles are descriptive and meaningful and representative of the content, the same with the meta descriptions, the same with your headings. And then you take a look at of your structured data, of your schema, implementation, and see if it actually is updated or representative of the product, for example, or the information of the page where it's implemented. So an active and proactive validation, I think, is meaningful and is important, especially when you are just releasing, right? To avoid including information that is inaccurate or that is not relevant at all, for example, not representative of what is actually meaningful, etc. Yeah, I think that an extra step of validation is important to align with the editorial guidelines, not only the technical guidelines that Google has, and it has I find that their documentation is really good, actually, in that the examples, do's and don'ts. So not only from a technical perspective, but you have like a checklist of validations that you do following their do's and don'ts and the specification for the guidelines for that specific type of structured data.
I once again agree 100%. One thing I would add too is that when you're implementing, let's say like more enterprise level, that you're implementing it and you're just putting out a subset of what you did for the pages. You're putting 10% of the pages out there, and then you're going and once again validating, re-verifying everything on that scale, just to make sure that for the most part, as you're pushing this out more as a template level, that you understand that the template is sound, it makes sense, and it's pulling in what it needs to pull in to properly represent what is on the page. So that would be my only addition.
Yeah, exactly. Like templates is the key there, isn't it? Check all your templates and eyeball them, right? Take the time to actually look at the data.
Yep. I think it doesn't matter how many tools you've got, it needs a level of manual review at some stage. So another quite specific one. This actually came up with Nick Ranger in our last session. She was saying one of the teams she'd worked with was having problems around time-sensitive structured data. I think the example she gave was for products. So I can't remember whether it was changing prices or it was stock levels. Yeah. Have you got an approach to dealing with that?
Well, that is why it is important that you have a solution that actually populates and updates with the actual information that is shown all the time on the website, rather than static option. Maybe for a static page like an FAQ or a Q&A or something that never changes, might be okay to hard code the structured data. But if it is content that is dynamic and is changing all the time, or is sensible to be changing the status, then it's important that the code populates from the actual information that is shown to the user. And if the information that has changed, if the content, if the price of the product has been updated, if there is an update in the ratings of the reviews, if there is an update in the stock, that is reflected and updated also in the code, and how it is populated and updated also accordingly. Not only when you update that information, when the information is updated on the page, it doesn't only update on the text, on the information, the content, but also on the structured data, the schema that is generated for that page also.
Yeah.
I think with this goes back to, once again, it's like, how are you implementing this? How are you implementing this in a dynamic way, or implementing it as a way that will refresh and look at those pages constantly to make those changes? And on big e-commerce sites, you want to have that. Now, for smaller sites, you may not have the time or money to have a product or service doing that. So you may have to go back to literally, you're the one, or your team is the one that is manually making those changes and implementing them, keeping track of them, which is not the best way to go about it. But I realize that a lot of companies may not have the ability to invest in infrastructure or products to be able to make it seamless.
I think in this case, actually, Nick's example was one where they had a special price offer that expired on midnight of the 24th, for instance, but Google still had that version, the price displaying of the offer on the 25th, 26th, 27th, and people were coming to the site and going, well, the offer, that I saw in the SERPs was, £15, but actually it's £20. Like, what's the deal? Is there any specific ways any specific properties that could be used, for instance, to mitigate that sort of thing?
I think that's more of an issue of, is your page getting refreshed? And at this point, I think we're totally out of control with even doing it on a singular basis now in terms of requesting indexing. So I think that you're at the whim of Google. One other side note on that example, I think the other example was, I think Nikki was saying about whether it's in stock or out of stock, and why do you put something out of stock and then people won't go to it? And another little workaround of that is like you pull, once again, you don't have to mark up everything on a page. You pull that availability markup off of the page if it's out of stock, so that people don't see that. They will potentially go into that page and see, and then they see it's out of stock. But now you have if they're brand centric, then you have a carousel on the bottom of what things to choose, but also you have an email like, hey, it's out of stock, put your email in here and we will alert you the minute it is ready to go. And so that's another way to get them into the site and you to work with them to keep them as a potential buyer.
This is great because it shows how this implementation shouldn't be isolated. It should align with a broader set of efforts within your technical SEO and SEO strategy for your content, because at the end of the day, this is highly tied with meaning and content of even if the implementation is highly technical, right? And this shows the impact of it, when to select to show what, when to do like a validation and an analysis of what is actually meaningful for you. And you don't only do it because there's a checklist saying these are all of the attributes that should be shown. No, it is really required or not. If it is not required, is it really something that I can profit on, or it will be like something that will end up harming me or not benefiting me? So you should assess that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few people that the solution to what they needed was to remove the structured data. They found that was a better solution. Like you were saying there, sometimes it's not beneficial to have it on the page.
But it's like, again, you need to do an assessment and a validation from a strategic standpoint. Like in the past, I have seen, and we can see a little bit of data, how some people relying on dynamic serving or independent mobile websites ended up removing their structured data from the mobile pages to avoid adding more higher loading time. So this page is entirely right, rather than finding a more balanced type of solution and option. These pages now will have issues with the mobile first index, right? So again, you can implement or select to do something in so many different ways. What is important is you analyze and validate and select the roadmap that actually makes sense to profit as much as possible, and without necessarily implementing extreme solutions that will end up harming you even in the long run, right?
Yeah. So next up is a question that I really like, because we've had to look at it so much in the last few months. Which validation tool should I listen to? They all give me different results.
Oh, God.
So, I mean,
Typo.
even Google's own. Typo's the obvious answer, yes. We all know that one. But even Google's own tools, they give different results.
Yeah, well, it's funny to see, because at the end of the day, the tool that Google is keeping and pushing and promoting is the one that is connected with the search features that they support. They actually informed yesterday that they will be maintaining but migrating the structured data validator, but in the Schema website, isn't it? Not in their own website, showing that at the end of the day, what they will focus on is on those structured data that are tied with search features or that they will support at the end of the day. Realistically, what I, as an SEO, and I have to say, what I focus on is and try to prioritize is the validation, the data that Google gives me, whether through the Google Search Console. Then, of course, I use their own search features validator tool directly. I use SEO crawlers too to triple validate or double validate. Of course, Sitebulb is my preferred validator of choice in this case, because how well is tied also, and how it differentiates those structured data that will generate shared features and which are not, and how it connects also so well with what triggers issues and warnings with Google directly, right? So yes, I double and triple validate. I try as much as possible to avoid any warnings, any issues across all of them. And if I will prioritize something, I will say is what triggers the errors in the Google Search Console and in the Google tool at the end of the day. Because sadly, as an SEO, yeah, I am dependent of the big G here for my results. Yeah.
Absolutely. In Google Search Console, that's kind of where you go for the absolute answer to truth. Like, does this work for us? Yes or no? And then all the other pre-steps of going rich results test, checking that out, then going to, a structured data testing tool I still use because I love it, but it'll soon be, I think it's validator.schema.org, which will be, and going to check everything related to the schema markup that could potentially be on the page. I think that's important. And now, once again, that's only page-wise. And then we can go to something like a schema app or a Sitebulb to look at site-wide, which of course gives us a whole bunch of other information of just how we're creating this as a whole, for this knowledge graph, and see if there's missing things. But I think that, once again, like, you're correct. You have to use all of these tools in concert, but at the end, it's going to be Google Search Console. But one thing I will say is, with all these tools, they are validating, is the syntax correct, is the connection correct? But the reality is, they're not telling you, did you properly take the main entity? Did you take that main entity and correctly nest a property type against it that makes sense? For instance, you have a product where you nest via the property type subject of for an FAQ page. Did you properly do that right? Did you do it when you should have versus did it and you shouldn't have? So those are the bigger questions in terms of validation. That is not just on a technical level, it's the level of the entity structure and connectivity. And that's still, there isn't a tool for that, because that's where we come in. To make those decisions and help guide our clients for that. But there's just that other level as well.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that we kind of hoped to try and do with Sitebulb, was just to facilitate that process, to put it into a format which you can easily tell whether that's right or not.
I love the tool. It's great. It's great for what it does.
Get it?
So information and Sitebulb is the answer to that question. Okay, right.
So following on from that, from the chat, we've got one from Sungtan here. So this is kind of more about pandering to Google again. So why does Google recommend JSON LD over microdata? Surely microdata is superior, as there's no chance of discrepancy between schema and text.
Yes, if you, this is a really good question by Sugan, but in fact, and it really took my attention, because I still remember, oh my God, and it might tell my actual age here, when we were still using micro formats, and then all of a sudden microdata came, and it's like, oh my God, this is great, but still HTML, right? And then JSON LD is like, so I could see this push and much more reliance on the JavaScript side of things. It will be great. That is a question that you might want to ask to John potentially too, to see why there is a preference in their case. Because at the end of the day, with the schema vocabularies, you should be able to use different type of formats. I don't know if they have probably answered this in the past. I don't know, David, the answer here.
I think that the biggest thing, to my knowledge of what I heard, is that. With JSON LD, you're extracting it away from the HTML, and so it becomes separate, and then so you don't have to deal with what's going on in HTML. And so for a lot of people that don't have developers or in-house people, that not having to interact with HTML is a really good thing. That you can bring in and slide this component in there that represents structured data and does not touch anything, because as we know, if something goes wrong, they're going to be like, oh, you were in it, so it had to be you, which, is not always the case. But I think that separation was the key that make that clean. Now, is it a duplication? Yes, it is. But is it easier in the long run for a lot of people not to touch the HTML? And I think that's the reason.
It's true. It is in an additional layer at that time. Because it's not within the HTML. But then again, indeed, you can manipulate it much more easily because it's not within the HTML directly. And yes, it's a duplication at the end of the day because it is the information is already in the HTML too. So yes, but and then also it's not that a code in JSON LD is necessarily like less complex that some few tags and add it there. But yes, it might be a cleaner implementation for sure. And you don't need to be like manipulating the HTML data entirely all the time. Yeah, I do like that.
I know from a personal experience, when they first brought it in, I was working with a client and it took it from there was no way in hell they were going to be able to do it. I mean, it was a massive site to all of a sudden, well, this sits separately. So, yeah, we can do it. That's not a problem. It just needed to pull the data it needed. So that was really interesting how it was a complete no-go when they need to edit the HTML.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting, but call me a purist here. But if you give me something to implement in general, right? Of course, I will use JSON LD because it's the preferred format. They have mentioned it. But if in general, right, if you give me different choices of doing it, and if you give me like the simpler to understand and better integrated one, like if you give me the HTML way to do it, I will rather choose it and try to avoid any unnecessarily reliance. I think that there's so much reliance nowadays on JavaScript, especially the client-side render one, and yeah, no, it has been going a little bit out of hands, but yes.
So another one from the chat from Simon here. We mentioned manual actions earlier on. Has anyone seen a structured data cause manual action? I haven't.
You know what? This is very funny. Potentially, Dave, that you focus on structured data much more. You have probably seen all type of cases, and weird or not even. But in my case, thankfully, I haven't never been penalized for something that meaningful. And in the case that a website I had access to was penalized by a former implementation, was something that ended up, it was a manual action, literally flagging some particular pages that were not necessarily featuring ratings and were including some supposed to be rating information. And it don't like, and honestly, like the impact was not meaningful, pretty much because these pages were trivial, literally for the website as a whole. It's interesting to see the stance, though, of Google with this sort of things, because I think it was a couple of years ago or a year and a half when for one of the many elections that Spain went through 2018 or so, one of the main newspapers, like the top one, literally ranking for the election results in Google, very big media website, was using the events structured data to be shown with the really nice looking event search features there, and they were not featuring any events, right? And I called this out literally, like in Twitter. It's like, why is this page featuring this structured data, etc., etc.? And Google shows that, and nobody's doing that. And then all of my SEO colleagues here in Spain that I know who work for other prominent media website and newspapers say, yes, we have all that called out that many years ago, and Google doesn't do anything. So it depends on the site, I will say, what they do, what they end up doing from what I have seen, right, with that example of the action that they take. But yes, thankfully, I haven't seen any case myself of a website losing even rankings or something that much of an impact because of a misuse, because I am a very highly responsible
So I have seen manual actions, and more so in the past than now. I think what has happened with Google is, obviously a lot of it had to do with rating stars, obviously, but that abuse, they've cracked down on rating star abuse tremendously. And I think what ends up happening now is, instead of manual actions or just actions in general, is that they're just not giving it to you. You're trying for the rich result, or you're trying to get the local business that is a sub-page of an organization to have rating stars, and they're just like, they don't give it to you. And in the end of the day, they're accomplishing their goal, which is stopping you from an algorithmic, as opposed to doing a manual sort of action. And I think that their ultimate goal is probably to do no manual actions if possible and do everything algorithmically. And I think that that's what I've seen with structured data is less of manual actions. And they were far and few between. And when they did come to me with that, it was real abuse. It was like absolutely hiding content, spamming rating stars, and so forth. But I think it's less and less, and they just have the ability to just not give you what you were trying to hope for.
Jeff, we have a really good question from Andy Simpson. Do you want to pull that one up?
Right. I'm going to, while I go and find that, I'll leave you with another quick one here. How much should I worry about warnings in Google Search Console? So a bit of a step backwards from the manual actions.
Once again, it depends. So once again, a warning is a warning, so you don't have to worry about it. But a lot of times, a warning is related to what they think should be on the page. Now, there's many cases where they're saying, like, you didn't put this in here. You didn't put the TIN code. And it's because, well, we don't have it on the page. There's not a need for us to put this information on the page. Therefore, we're not going to do it. And the priority has to be, you're putting what you need to represent on the page for that product, for that service. And so the warnings are their guideline to what you should put. But the priority is always going to be what makes sense for your product and your pages in terms of the warnings. Errors are a different subject, but even with errors, sometimes it's like you get an error for something, like we just don't have that. Like for, let's say, a product, and the product, like we just don't put price. We don't feel the need. You have to call us to talk to our salespeople because it's $50,000 a piece. We're not putting that out there. And so even errors sometimes, once again, it depends on what your needs are first with the product pages and with all the pages.
I hear you, especially, for example, in my case, I have seen a couple of situations where, for example, the job postings missing base salary. Sometimes I am not given that information. Sorry, what do you want me to give misinformation, to say 0 or something like that? I've seen websites doing this and to get away with this. Unfortunately, what I have found, and also it largely depends on what type of structured data, but in our case, for the job posting, we are not being pulled and shown in the features box because of because we have a few warnings like this, but it's because we literally don't want to give out misinformation, right? So again, you need to assess here what's the best way to move forward, what you are looking to achieve, what is your goal, what are the trade-offs. In our case, for example, what we have chosen to do is to start gathering more data, and we're adding more fields to whatever job posting that we publish on the website, so we can support those fields in the future and populate those fields in the future with accurate information, so we don't end up having any sort of penalization or issues in the future, and being able to be completely open and available to be selected to be shown in the features, in the job features box, right? But yes, at the end of the day is to assess this. Another scenario where I have found that it actually bothers me, and sorry, I am like sharing here my struggles, like in the how-tos. Why do you need an image for each single step? What the heck? In some cases, it makes sense. In other cases, it's like, why? It's like, and then what I have seen that many websites do is they populate every step with the exact same image.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you off the actual supposed to be goal, right? To represent each step with something meaningful. So again, it's like, yeah, take it with a grain of salt and balance it out and analyze it and assess it in the best possible way that represents your content, trying to align it with the guidelines, the editorial guidelines that are provided by Google, and also to maximize the chances that you are gotten into those features, because by all means, I love that my content is more meaningful for Google thanks to the structured data, but I want to be included there too. Yeah. Right,
so time is ticking away on us. So we've got this really interesting one from from Andy, sorry, that I think we'll probably finish up with. So Andy asks, have you found any content that you cannot use Schema for? He does victim support pages for sexual abuse victims in LA and cannot get FAQ Schema to show for any of the main pages. He's also followed up with a few more details there. They all rank on page 1 for related terms, but no FAQ Schema.
Yes, I know that, for example, there are certain type of content like porn-related information that is not supported, for example. I think that there are some types that, unfortunately, of information that are not supported. So, yes, it's important to check the guidelines at the end of the day and see how much you are able to get in or not. And I'm afraid that if it is not supported, like, you're not able to do that. I wouldn't recommend you to do it anyway, because you can end up getting a penalization because of that, right? It's unfortunate.
And I think that, with the FAQ Schema, before it used to be like almost a guarantee. You would apply it, you implement it, and boom, FAQ. And then they backed off on that, and they were just a little more cautious on making sure that the FAQ Schema was relevant to the content, relevant to the search result. And I've seen lots of clients who have lost FAQs that they used to have before, because they're trying to be as aligned as they can. Now, I don't know the specific example here on how it relates or what's happening in the SERPs, but I think that it's a case of them being more cautious and aligning the content of the FAQ page to probably the main entity of that page and how it relates in terms of the search intent. So once again, it doesn't answer the question, and if I knew more details, I could probably answer it. But right now, I mean, they're more stringent in terms of allowing that rich result to happen.
I mean, I do wonder as well with something like that whether it's possibly just been miscategorized along with, like, so what you were saying later with porn and offensive content and things. I mean, when it's done algorithmically, you never know how these things are getting grouped. So that brings us to the end of our time. So thank you to everyone for watching us. Thank you very much, Simon, on the chat there for keeping things rolling. Looks like we've had quite a few people in there. It's been good. Especially thanks to Dave and Aleyda. It's been great hearing your approach on this stuff. Could ask you a lot more questions if we had the time. To finish up, could I ask both of you to give one last tip for structured data problem solving? This is probably also a good time to let people know how to keep up to date with what you're doing, and if you've got anything you're working on at the minute that you'd like to share with everyone. So, Dave, would you like to go first?
Sure. So my tip would be just that, while you put a lot of effort into getting your structured data implemented out there and recognized, it's also as important with anything regarding the website to occasionally check and verify. Is the schema markup still coming up? Is it still being deployed correctly? Because, depending on the site and the size of the company you're working with, there are other hands in the pot. They may be doing something on GTM or they're tweaking something with your microdata. And so you want to periodically put that in with all the other things that you periodically test to make sure that it is working correctly. A plugin updates, and for some reason it's not working out, but you didn't know. So just keep that in mind, and just put that in your occasional checklist for the website. You can get a hold of me if you want. Let's see if I could do this right. Let's see. There, on Twitter. Yeah. Or you could grab me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk to anyone about schema markup. And thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Dave. Aleyda.
Yes, in my case is make sure to align very well your structured data efforts within the broader SEO efforts that you do in your process, so it pays off and makes sense and you can show results as soon as possible. So, for example, a way to do this is if I know that it will take non-trivial technical effort to implement structured data, and the client will want to see results fast, or they ask for to make a case for them, right? So I go and take a look at which are those structured data, those search features that are shown in SEMrush or Href or Systrix or whatever of these tools that are being shown in the SERPs where my pages are already being shown in the top 10 results. And I see that other players, other competitors ranking along my own website are also even already leveraging, and then I prioritize those pages to be implemented the first ones, right? These are the ones that will be start to get featured much more quickly, very likely the ones that will have a much higher impact, much more faster from a click-through rate perspective too, and the ones that I will be using not to say, look, this is what we have done and that's it, but look, this is my case. This is how we have implemented structured data across these sections or this group of pages, set of pages, and these are the results that we have gotten. And this is how now we are featured before and after versus our competitors. So this is why we should move forward with even more and get even more buy-in, more support, even if the initial implementation was potentially not necessarily the ideal in the first place. So for example, I have had cases in the past where the initial implementation was we had to do it via GTM. I know, not best, but it allowed us to prove a case. And 3 months after, because of the results that we were able to show through this initial GTM-based implementation, we got the approval to implement structured data in a proper way directly through the templates on the websites, right? So I will say to try to be strategical about it, to prioritize, to build cases, to show results as much as possible faster, because at the end of the day, yes, we're in SEO and we need to show results and positive ROI of our efforts, right?
Yeah, we're all slaves to the clients and Google. Well, thank you very much, Aleyda and Dave. It's been great having you. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to have more of these live streams coming up, hopefully. And of course, make sure you have a look at Sitebulb. As we just said, that's the tool you should be using. You can get a free trial on there and let us know what you think. And that's it from us. So good night and thank you again, everyone.
Oh, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Take care.